All right, everybody, I'm back. Gonna be back. So, want to go ahead and get to some news from, I think it was probably late morning, early afternoon on Monday, depending on where you were. And it involved the defending national champion. Oh, yeah, those UConn Huskies. That's right. It was about 3 weeks ago now that UConn won its sixth national championship in school history in men's basketball, the second straight under Dan Hurley. Since then, no slowing down, full speed ahead for Hurley and his staff. Added Terrace Reed, transfer from Michigan. Added Liam McNeely, the McDonald's All-American, who we discussed at length and did a reaction video on, I guess it would have been Saturday morning, I guess, because he committed on Friday. If you missed that, we'll go ahead and link it below when you're done here. That is because Liam McNeely, great player, but he's old news because on Monday, Dan Hurley was back at it. He went fishing in the transfer portal. I think that's how you fish. I'm not really much of a fisherman, but there's a visual, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on pod, no such luck. But on Monday, Dan Hurley does it again as one of the best players in the portal that was available. Aiden Mahaney, 6'3" guard from St. Mary's, was their leading scorer last year. He committed to the University of Connecticut. How about them Huskies? He is now the third marquee decision of the offseason for the Huskies. And let me say this. Yes, I absolutely believe that UConn, barring something totally shocking over the next couple days and weeks, I believe they are good enough to win a national championship yet again. I think they are going for 3 straight, and I think they got a shot. By the way, how about our buddy Dan Hurley? And yeah, I just so happened, I swear this was kind of accidental, happened to be wearing the Mora Hurley 24 tee as it went live. You can grab yours. The link is below at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. With that said, let's go ahead and talk Aiden Mahaney and the 2024-2025 UConn Huskies because they are, once again, very much loaded. Starting with Mahaney, as I said, he was St. Mary's leading scorer, one of the top 25 teams in the country by the end of the season, 13.9 points per game. As a sophomore, actually averaged 13.9 points per game as a freshman. As a freshman, shot over 40% from three. This year, it dipped to about 35.5%. But at the same time, guy has averaged 14 points per game for back-to-back tournament teams on about 37% three-point shooting over the course of his career. So really good player, really talented player. And I think it's worth noting, did it in a system that really isn't built to highlight scorers. I believe St. Mary's was the second lowest tempo in all of college basketball to make the NCAA tournament. Only Virginia played slower. So this was a guy that put up buckets in a place that really isn't designed to do that. And so I think now you put him in that UConn system where, listen, I don't think he's going to be a 20-point-a-game scorer or anything like that. But can he be around that 10, 11, 12, 13-point-per-game scorer in a much more efficient manner because the offense flows smoother, because the possessions are up, because the shots are up? Yeah, I believe he can be like an 11, 12-point-per-game scorer much more efficiently next year. And here's the great part if you're the Huskies. This kid is a kid that has 2 years of eligibility left. He's probably not an NBA player, so you're probably getting Aiden Mahaney for not 1, but 2 years coming up if you're the Huskies. So this is exciting. This is big. And let me start by saying this. I believe that UConn is absolutely in position to potentially win a second straight, UConn fans, please forgive me. They're in position to win a third straight national championship next year. Now, listen, it's not going to be easy. There's a lot of good teams out there. Winning in March is hard. But you start to look at what this UConn roster could look like next year, I think it has a chance to be very, very, very special. I look at this UConn roster in kind of 4 different kind of components or quadrants or compartments or whatever. First, you should have, again, barring something surprising, 3 marquee players that played marquee roles on this past year's national championship team returning in 2024-2025. Alex Karaban's the big one, and I think he's really interesting. He averaged 13.5 points per game this past year. That number was up. The shooting percentage was actually a little bit down, and he's a guy that I think if he comes back, he is a breakout potential type star on the national scene. Averaged 9 2 years ago, 41% three-point shooting. This year dealt with injuries, wasn't quite as good and managed to get up to 13 points per game. Again, the efficiency wasn't quite there, but that's what happens when you have a lot of injuries. And frankly, when you're pretty much the fifth option on offense, it speaks to how potent and deadly UConn was last year. In addition to Alex Hikaraban, Hassan Diarra, as of right now, I still expect to come back. Now, I know he said on this podcast, the Aaron Torres pod, the expectation was to make a decision weeks ago. He has not yet. But unless something changes, I still kind of expect him to be back at UConn for the 2024-2025 season. Samson Johnson, athletic big, played a key role, backed up Donovan Clingan, effort, energy, rebounding, shot blocking. He should be back as well. So that's kind of quadrant number one. Quadrant number two, there are a couple freshmen from this past season's team that I expect to make big leaps in 2024-2025. First one, kid named Jalen Stewart. And if you just look at the box scores, you'll sit there and say, oh, Torres, how big of a leap is he going to make? He averaged 2.5 points per game last year. Torres, what are you talking about? You're overselling him because he's a UConn guy. I don't believe that, okay? The bottom line with Jalen Stewart, just go back and watch the Big East Championship game against Marquette. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that UConn does not win the Big East tournament if Jalen Stewart does not carry the team for about a 3 to 4 minute stretch in the second half, or certainly he turned a close game into a blowout. Jalen Stewart is going to be a breakout star, I believe, on the national scene. Solo ball. A guy who, frankly, probably played a little bit better early in the year, 6'4" guard. But listen, this kid had 13 in a game in a win over Carolina at Madison Square Garden. He had 12 in a Big East game against Xavier. This kid's capable. There was a lot of good players in front of him. Assuming he comes back, assuming there's no issues over the next day or so in the portal, I think he has a chance to be a very good player next year at UConn. Those are the returnees. Now you start talking about who's coming in. The freshmen, we talked about Liam McNeely quite a bit. I won't rehash everything I've said, but you talk about a kid that is 6'7", 6'8", can put the ball in the basket. He's going to play a very important role this coming season. I don't think he's a superstar right away, but by the end of the year, are you kidding me? 6'7", 6'8"? I could see him being a guy that does average, 16, 17 points per game when it's all said and done. Maybe not 16, 17, maybe 14, 15 as a freshman. Very efficient three-point shooter. And he's going to get comfortable as time goes on in college. As long as he's willing to commit on defense the way that Dan Hurley expects, I think you can see him play a major role as a freshman in 2024, 2025. And it's the same with a kid named Ahmad Noel, who is a freshman guard who I expect to back up Hassan Diarra. Listen, this kid is special. I think Dan Hurley has a track record already over the last 4 or 5 years of finding, evaluating, and developing guys that the recruiting services aren't quite as high. And we talk about it all the time. Donovan Clingan, fringe top 50 guy. Jordan Hawkins, fringe top 50 guy. Alex Caravan, fringe top 100 guy. All those guys play in the NBA or will play in the NBA someday. Ahmad Noel's a little smaller, but he was like a 4-star, 35th ranked player in the country. I think he's going to be a key contributor next year and a breakout star down the road. I know I'm saying everybody's going to be a breakout star, but based on Dan Hurley's track record, I'm probably going to end up being right on most of them. So you have the 2 freshmen, and then finally 2 transfers as of right now. Terrace Reed, backup center or center, however Hurley ends up playing him. 6'10", played really, really, really hard for a Michigan team that wasn't good. And I think his effort and energy is going to go ahead and, I think he's going to fit in at UConn. I just do. And then you have Aidan Mahaney, 6'3". I expect him to be a 41% three-point shooter. And so you now start talking about UConn, barring something surprising. This is a team. And by the way, keep in mind, I'm recording here about 4 p.m. Eastern time on Monday morning, okay? Monday afternoon, excuse me. So a lot can change, but I just bring it up to say, look at that team. 2 lead guards, 2 7-footers, positional size and versatility and athleticism pretty much everywhere else. Liam McNeely, great three-point shooter. Aidan Mahaney, great three-point shooter. All the other guys are applicable three-point shooters except for the big guys. So look, what else do you need? Size, athleticism, ball handling, three-point shooting, about 8 or 9 guys that you can probably count on at various points in the season. I think it's going to be fun, and I think UConn's going to be good again. Now, listen, there's going to be other good teams. Kansas is really good with all their offseason stuff. Alabama's getting back Grant Nelson, as we learned on Monday. And there's going to be some other ones. I think UNC, now that RJ Davis is back, now that Cade Tyson is committed, is going to be in the mix. We'll see what happens with Mark Pope's first Kentucky roster. We'll see what happens with John Calipari's first Arkansas roster. And we'll see some other spots as well. But when I look at a team that is good enough to win the 2024-2025 national title, a third straight national championship, I think UConn falls under that category.